Morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. I wasn't sure if we were starting yet.
No, I just wanted to touch base with you. We'll give it a few minutes until we get, hopefully there'll be some more coming in. Okay. So I'm just going to go ahead and mute audio and video. And then when we get a couple of more people, I'll stop back in. Okay.
hmm
Before I do that, do you have any questions for me right off the bat?
Right off the bat, uh, just that I'm hoping we get to meet more as far as the DP
Yeah.
uh, necessities, because I'm sure I'll figure that out.
Yeah, no, I'm definitely, excuse me, over the next couple of weeks, I'm going to have meetings with just the DPs to talk about, shots and stuff.
The biggest thing I'm not worried about, but the biggest thing I have to learn about is budgeting.
Is about what?
The budgeting section.
Budgeting? Yeah,
Yeah.
we can talk about that a little bit today, actually.
Okay. Thank
Okay.
you.
All right. So I'll be back in a few. Hey, Andres, how are you? Can you hear me? Yeah, Tess is here, but we're gonna wait a little bit for a couple more people to show up. So I'm gonna go ahead and mute my video and my audio, and then in a few minutes we'll go ahead and get started. Okay. Okay, guys. I think Jeremy is trying to get signed in, so let's go ahead and we'll get started, and they can join us when they get to it.
Okay, sounds good.
All right. Okay, so I assume you guys can hear me and see me. All right. So I guess the first thing to start with is Um, I'll just throw it out to some general thoughts. You've all had a chance to read through the script, and in particular, I kind of want to get your thoughts on the the approach. What do you in terms of? I know the directors kind of got together, or at least shared some information back and forth. So just fill me in on what you guys are thinking.
Well, really quick, I wanted to, or sorry,
Go
Go
ahead.
ahead.
I wanted to mention that Rebecca texted me, and she doesn't have Wi-Fi where she lives, and she couldn't download the app on her phone. So I'll keep tabs for
No problem.
us on that.
No problem.
And as far as the script, I mean, it's pretty classic horror, like the mystery to it.
Mm-hmm.
And as far as shooting, I'd rather hear what somebody else has to say about that.
Okay, Andre, do you have any thoughts?
I spoke with Karen and a little bit with Jay, and I think we all three of us agreed on a more realistic approach to the film.
Right. Okay. I kind of agree that it feels like it's hey Karen, I didn't think you were going to be able to make it.
Hi, yes, sorry.
Oh, no
I'm
problem.
here.
Not at all. No problem. We got Andres and TJ are here, so we haven't really started talking about anything. Just Andres was saying a little bit about you guys trying to come up with an idea of, or you're thinking about, of taking it from a realism approach.
Yeah. I had
Okay.
talked to Jay about it, and we thought that would be. Um, he and I spoke first during the week, and we thought that would be cool. And there was a couple things that we were a little bit confused about in the script.
Okay. All right, so hold on. We'll get to that.
Yeah.
I met with the writer
Okay.
with the writers this morning, and so there's a couple of things that we talked about. I'll run by you that they had suggested. So Andres, you were saying that you guys feel like realism is the way to go,
Yeah, going with a more realistic approach.
right? Okay, and so give me in terms of realistic. Give me what you mean by realistic. I think I know. I just want to make sure we're all on the same page.
Let's see.
Or if you want to hand that off to somebody else, you can do that.
I just meant like not like as in like compared to like Hellboy, like where it's like a lot of like fat mysticism and a lot of visuals like that. I was thinking more like Karen has said, more is less, and I agree with it. So it's like when somebody feels like the imagery is more realistic, I feel they'll be more drawn into it and more of a chance of them being scared or having sort of feelings towards the film.
Okay. All right. So, Karen, what do you guys have in mind in terms of you guys are saying more realistic visually? So, are you thinking you're thinking about not doing like fantastical sci-fi stuff, right? You're talking
Yeah.
about make it feel more like a gritty western, like Unforgiven or something like that, but then throw in the horror elements.
Yes. Something more like that. I was actually telling them like I had said something more kind of like very different, but I really, for me, what reached out to me was more like Rosemary's Baby, that kind of approach to it.
Oh,
More of
interesting.
like that realistic. That's what I had for me. And then I don't know, and another movie that came to mind was Babadook. I don't know if you've seen that. It's a horror film.
I have not.
But
But I've heard really good things about it.
yeah, because there is more of that realistic approach, and I feel like visually that would be scarier for the audience. I don't know. That's
Right.
one. Yeah, a little
Well,
bit more
I mean, I
sinister, I
tend to agree
guess.
with that. I tend to agree that doing it in a going for more of a realism approach to it, I think is probably going to enhance the sense of horror to it. Yeah, because you're not injecting sort of a fantasy thing that's going to agree with you guys that's probably a good approach to it.
Yeah.
So Tessa, does that kind of give you an idea in terms of where we're going to go cinematically?
Yeah, I mean, versus something a lot more abstract.
Right.
I mean,
Well,
all of the scenes are. I'm
Wait,
sorry.
your name is Tesla? That's pretty cool.
No, it's just Tesla.
Tessa,
But,
not Tesla. In class, we talked about this, finding a balance between stylized versus realistic lighting. And I think that given what you guys are talking about, I think we definitely want to stay on the realistic side, which
Yeah.
from a DP's perspective, makes it easier and harder, right? I mean, easier in the sense that we're not going to have to be creating anything that's ultra stylized, but we also need to stay pretty well married to our motivating sources. So as you and I and the other DP are sitting down talking about lighting, we're going to want to keep in mind, that there's always going to have to be some sort of motivating source that gives the audience an idea of where the light's coming from, right? And so,
and luckily enough, for most of the scenes, until the very end, they're all like conversational interior, so we can get pretty, or I mean, it won't be too hard to make motivating sources for inside. We can add
I would agree
where
with
lights
that.
would be, or windows.
Yeah, yeah, and then maybe some candle wall sconces kind of thing to round out. Yeah, I think it can be. It certainly simplifies a lot of what we got to do. Yeah.
The only time I see concerns with sticking to completely or mostly realistic lighting is when we get towards the end with the scenes where there are implied or shadows that are, or whether they're going to be humanoid shadows or vague shadows. And when we're talking about shadows with glowing eyes, is that something we would want to do practically or in post? That is somewhere where realistic lighting would be different.
Question. And my leaning would be that anything that we can do practical, we should try to do it that way, because that gives us less that we have to worry about in post. So that would be, as we're planning through this, I hope that we can rely real heavily on practical effects as opposed to having to do a lot of VFX stuff, because that just ends up taking up so much time. But yeah, I agree with you. There are some lighting concerns in terms of some of the visual effects stuff that, how are we going to create the shadows? And, I have some pretty good ideas. I've done some stuff like that before, and I don't think it's going to be as complicated as it sounds. I think we can do we can make a pretty good go of it. Okay. So beyond the idea that it's realism is what we're going for, give me some thoughts, Karen. You said Rosemary's Baby and Babadook. What about it visually draws you to Rosemary's Baby? Is it the style of the shot? Is it the lighting? Is it the blocking?
I think because when I first read the script, when we read what it's going to be about, I felt much different. I feel like it's more of a sinister approach, and I visualize the film. I feel like that's why I come up, because there's an odd man out that knows what's really going on in the script, and I think that's what I like. Kind of like this seance type. Well, not really seance with our script, but it's like these people are giving these children as off.
Right.
I think that's what connected that for me was like, I feel like that's for me what I was like visually. I think that would be.
I'm having trouble hearing you. Your microphone is cutting in and out.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yeah, much better.
Hello? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, sorry. So for me, yeah, I just thought that the way that they filmed Rosemary's Baby
Okay.
with there being like this group or this cult that was giving her baby as an offering, like this was the devil's child. That was kind of like for me where it clicked, like the way they filmed it. I don't know, it was just very kind of sinister, but also realistic. Like she has no idea what's going on, and these people are like cultivating this demonic thing. I don't know, that visually, like that's for me, that's what the idea that I liked, that
Okay. No,
like
I
clicked.
think that's very helpful because gives me a good idea of the headspace that you're in terms of
Mhm.
the look. Andres, have you seen the film she's talking about?
I've seen screenshots, and also like I had a um, more of a Omen type of feel for it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think those two films are very similar in terms of the approach they take. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think that's a really good starting point. When you're thinking in terms of color, right? Were
Mhm.
you thinking of some ways of using color, either um, color tent with the film and the lighting, or production design or whatever? Have you been thought at all about the look you're thinking of in terms of color?
I thought
Oh, we
maybe just
didn't really, yeah, go for it, sorry.
oh, sorry, I
Go
was
ahead,
thinking
Andre.
more of a natural tone, neither warm nor cool,
Okay.
but use a lot of like like earthy colors like brown,
Yeah.
like stuff
Okay.
like beige and stuff like that.
All right. So you're seeing a natural palette, sort of like earth tones and okay. Is there a way that we could maybe find a way of putting a contrast in there in terms of um, maybe I mean thinking along these lines at the beginning of the film when we're in the study with the three professors in there before the adventure begins. What about maybe going with a nice warm palette, because that's the script kind of suggests the candlelight, the firelight, the warmth. And then when he gets to Tempest, then we go with the earth tones and something a little cooler so that there's a
Yeah.
distinction between his world before he begins his adventure and the world after. I mean, how does that
Yeah, I like
strike
that.
you, Andre?
Yeah, sounds good.
Yeah,
Very
so
good.
I think, I mean, in terms of I definitely think that helps sort of distinguish the two times within the film.
Yes.
Okay, all right. So then that'll kind of be the way that we move forward with that. So, in terms of look, do you guys have any other thoughts before we move on to a couple other things?
Uh,
Um,
no, no, no.
Tessa, did you have any thoughts based on what they're saying?
yeah, I was saying that as far as I'm not familiar with Rosemary's Baby and the Babadook and Omen, but I know that what you were talking about, the feeling seems to be a feeling of isolation,
Mhm.
of suspicion on behalf of the audience, where the audience isn't allowed to know or be a part of what's going on. And I think that's sort of maybe the feel that you were talking about.
Yeah.
And then as far as color, I agree with the difference. And I was wondering if also you were talking about high versus low key on the DP script. And I was thinking not only with the warm palette versus the earth tones and cooler palette, having a higher key filming, uh, I guess, strategy earlier on and then a lower key one later on would give it this feeling of, uh, I
Sort of make
guess,
feel more
sinister.
ominous towards the end as the tension rises. Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah, so that's something that we can think about from a DP's perspective as well. When we start and directors too, but when we start thinking about our shots, the actual shots that we're going to be setting up to build on this idea that you had about him being an outsider and separated from the town and the people that are there. Let's think about when we're creating our frames using what's called surface division. In other words, we can use objects within our frame to create a visual separation between the protagonist and the rest of the rest of the world. And so we don't have to be worried about that right now. But as you're thinking about the visual, how we're going to storyboard this out, so to speak, keep those things in mind. These are ways that we can use our camera to help the audience sort of subliminally feel the alienation that he feels. Because remember, we're only dealing with about 20 minutes in time here. It's not like a feature where we can spend 45 minutes setting up his sense of being alone, like Scorsese did in Taxi Driver. So we need to use all those tools, and one of the tools are the visual elements that we can create separation between the main character and the rest of the world.
And I was thinking that works really well as far as, I mean, I haven't talked to Rebecca yet, but what I was thinking as far as camera movement, because of the nature of the scenes early on, like really complex or like big camera movement doesn't add to the scene or doesn't work within the time. So I was thinking that with scenes where the camera is more static, or most of the scenes where the camera is almost completely static, as far as like set dressing and what we do symbolically with that can add a lot to what we mean versus bringing the camera around to two people talking.
Yeah, definitely. Andres and Karen, what are you seeing in terms of camera movement since we talked about that? Are you a fan of a moving camera, or do you think it's how do you feel about that?
I feel I'm sorry, go ahead.
I think that would be pretty cool. I mean, I think it would give you more of his point of view, which would be pretty interesting. I kind of like that.
Okay, Andres, your thoughts?
I like the movement of camera only when I feel like it's necessary. Like, for example, when she's in the office by herself and we see the sheriff come in to start
right
feeling it. So like maybe the eerie dollying in of the camera will create a little eerie suspense to it as well.
Yeah, no, I like that idea, and I'm absolutely in agreement with you, Andres. I'm a fan of camera movement when it's motivated, when there's a reason for it. And I'd like for you guys to be thinking about how we can use camera movement as a way of let's see, setting up some things. So, for example, have you all seen Jaws, or at least seen some Jaws, the Steven Spielberg movie?
Yeah, I've seen it.
Jaws?
Yes. Yeah. Yes, Jaws. One of the things that Spielberg did with Jaws was with the music.
Mm-hmm.
Every time there was the shark around, we heard that John Williams low bum 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 score, and so that helped the audience sort of go from, oh, it's a really sunny day at the beach, to something bad is going to happen. So when we're thinking about our camera and the movement, think about how we can use camera to clue the audience in to something bad something really bad is just about to happen. So, and an example, and this may not be the way you decide to go, but an example would be for all of the shots that are where there's really no danger, like he's just, they're in the newspaper office talking, or he meets his sister on the platform. We've got a steady locked off camera. But then when something bad is going to happen, like you mentioned with the sister in the newspaper office and the sheriff comes in, maybe then think about incorporating a little bit of subtle camera movement. I'm not a big fan of like, handheld, jerky, jittery motion. So I wouldn't say go that far, but maybe think about, when there's something not quite right, maybe inject a little bit of camera movement, whether it's like you said, Andres, a nice, really slow push in, or maybe a really subtle tracking, or a slider dolly sort of an effect, or even, maybe a slight crane up or crane down. that kind of helps the setup for the audience. So especially in the very final scene, when we finally see the monster, then we've got it established that camera, we could use a more mobile camera there in order to kind of choreograph the action. So just think about that when you're, thinking about how we're going to set this up. The only thing I would say is just keep in mind that anytime we move our camera during a shot, it's going to add amount of time to shooting, and it obviously it takes more time to set up, more time to execute, and more things can go wrong. So I think we need to use a moving camera very sparingly, not use it a whole lot, but I definitely like the idea of incorporating camera movement at certain key points. So we can think about that excuse me, more as we go forward. So any other thoughts along those lines?
Just wanted to talk about the monster, make him more
let's talk about the monster.
Yeah.
I think me, Karen, and Jay agreed the tentacles was a little weird. We'd like to remove the tentacles, and then, well, personally, I was thinking more of like a satanic goat head type monster. And also changing the name from the ancient ones to something a little bit more scary. The ancient ones sounds kind of like old teachers, not really monsters.
Right, I got it. Yeah, I understand. No, I have no problem with that. I mean, we can certainly make those tweaks. It's not going to be a big deal. We've got some time. Right now, I think, and I met with the writing team earlier. My biggest concern right now is making sure that we've got the basic structure down, because that's how we're going to schedule this out. If we end up deleting or adding a scene, that's going to change our schedule. In terms of the dialogue and some of the other stuff, we can tweak that all the way up until we get to the point of shooting. Did Elizabeth send you some? She sent me some shots that her research for the SFX people generated, and so I want to show you a screen grab of something that she sent me that I actually think is pretty cool. And it's not quite what you're thinking of, Andre, but I think we could certainly incorporate it. And just looking at this, well, it scared the shit out of me, but it's also something that I think we can definitely pull off. We can definitely pull this off in terms of makeup. And maybe put the actor on short stilts, like 1 foot stilts, to give him that added height, and then this kind of becomes the look of the monster. What are your thoughts? And I know you had said like a goat head and that kind of feel, but we could certainly maybe incorporate some of that feeling into this basic character.
Yeah,
what are your thoughts, guys?
It's a pretty savage looking creature right there.
Yeah,
it is, and I can certainly picture that eating a baby.
Yeah.
What do you think, Tessa?
I think that we should focus on camera angle and lighting to make obviously what would be a human in makeup look as large as possible.
Oh, absolutely. Now, I mean, I think that if we, excuse me, that we shouldn't have any problem with putting our actor on, some short stilts of like 1.5 feet. That shouldn't pose a problem. And then if we shoot from a low angle, that of course accentuates. And then maybe, the way we block it with the other actors, we just kind of find a way of staging them a little closer to a little further away from the camera than the monster is, so that it gives sort of almost a forced perspective like they did in Lord of the Rings. I certainly think that we can enhance the ominous feel of the monster. But I mean, do you think this, because I'm going to be meeting with the SFX people in a little bit, is this sort of the direction you think we should keep going in this direction?
Yeah, I like that. Yeah.
Yeah. I'd like to there's a couple of changes that we can make. Because I'm not crazy about the nose. It looks too human, but it certainly is a good foundation for, and just, I think this is certainly doable within our skill level and budget, and we can make this even better. So, so I'll tell the special effects team that this is sort of the direction that we're thinking of, but ask them to sort of find a way if we can maybe make it demon goat-like kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. That'd be cool.
Yeah, maybe give it some horns or something or whatever.
Yeah, horns.
Yeah. Cool. All right. So good. I'm glad she sent that.
No.
All right. So any other thoughts before we move on to a couple other things? Okay, cool. The the writers had a couple of suggestions, and I said I would run by you. The first one is kind of an interesting thought. There's the scene where um, the sister gets murdered, right? And as it's written
Yeah.
right now, the sheriff and I forget it's the Ernest or whatever his name is, Everett. They go in and they hang her, right? Um, they were saying, what if instead of hanging her, it's made to look more like it was the monster that killed her, and then her brother, we add a scene where her brother actually finds her and she's kind of a
Yeah.
mutilated corpse, because their thought on this, and I tend to agree with this, is that kind of makes the monster a little scarier because we've seen the damage. We haven't seen the monster, but we've seen what the damage could be. And then
Yeah, I like that because I was confused that I was confused that there was no scene where he found his sister after being
right.
murdered, or and his intention to go look for her.
Right. Yeah, so I think that would solve that concern, but also might make it more make the monster a little more ominous, you know, because when we
Mhm.
see him at the end, now we've seen basically what the monster can do. How
Yeah.
do you feel about that, Andres?
Yeah, I think that's a great idea.
Okay. All right. So I'll tell them to go ahead and start working up that scene. What it may end up being is the scene where the sheriff goes in. We may have to shorten that a little bit so we still have enough time to shoot everything. And then the other suggestion they had, and I'm not sure it's worth the extra time, is they were suggesting that maybe right before the scene in the asylum where they go back to his two buddies go back to see Von Ensign, they were saying that maybe have a scene of them walking down the hallway together. Um, I It's not a bad idea. I just don't know that with the amount of time that we've got, adding that is going to do much for the story. What do you guys think?
I was kind of thinking of ending it with the monster showing up in his cage or his cell after
Oh,
they leave.
really? Interesting.
You
What do you
said,
think about that, Karen?
well, that's the thing, because this was a question that Jay and I had too, was why would the monster keep him alive? Why would he make it back? You know what I mean?
Okay. Right. No, I get it.
So that was like why it felt
Okay.
very
Interesting.
kind of obvious. So we didn't know where to go from there. But
Okay.
that's one of our concerns was why would why if they saw Von Itzen as like a threat, why keep him alive?
Interesting. No, that's a really good question. The only thing I can say is from um, my readings of Lovecraft. One of
Mm-hmm.
the things that Lovecraft tends to do is uh, the protagonists who encounter whatever um, they end up being going mad. They become insane as and I think, and I'm certainly not a scholar on Lovecraft, but I think one of the things that he was trying to communicate was that technology and advancement and the future is going to make us all go crazy, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And so that might have been what the writer was going for, but I also would be open to ideas of how we can end it differently if you guys feel that being in the asylum is not really working. So let's go ahead and put a pin in that and let you guys think about it for a couple of days and see if there's something. The idea of the monster killing him is certainly something to play around with. Work that up a little bit, figure out how we would incorporate that in terms of what is the how are we going to make that happen? Would it be right then and there in the church, or would it be, as Andres was saying, he shows up in the cell? It could be anything. Let's try to flesh that out a little bit, and then maybe in a couple of days we can talk more about it if you guys have some thoughts on it. Okay.
Really quick, just because you were asking the question of why they might keep Von Etzen alive. And I actually thought it was, when I was reading the script, I thought it was a parallel to what we see with Zeb.
Yeah, I kind of got that too, because they both kind of speak in rhyme and are not really there behind the eyes. I did see that maybe that the monster doesn't necessarily have to kill the people, because I mean, obviously they've lost their mind. It's not like they're going to be able to tell anybody. And so, like I said, I don't have a really strong feeling either way about the way it ends. I like the way it is now, but I also, I agree that it could be made better by, something. So think about that.
Or at least just more clear.
More what?
It would just have to be more clear if we go with like the people who are kind of trying to look for answers, that they do end up becoming crazy, trying to make it a little bit more clear. And then in the end, it ends up just like everyone else who try to keep searching for answers.
That could be maybe that would be a way to handle it, is to maybe find a way earlier in the script or through some of the other dialogue or one of the interactions with the two characters at the beginning. We make it more clear that this is this is what happens when you go looking for answers. From a director's perspective, don't lose sight of the fact that we might be able to use some of this as a way of incorporating like a message or a theme or some deeper meaning. I spoke a little bit ago about how Lovecraft kind of was making a commentary in a lot of his work on the advancements of science can bring just as much bad as they can good. That's a pretty common recurring theme through most science fiction. And so think about maybe how that we could play into that and maybe make that a stronger message, without maybe changing the end of the story. Like I said, I'm open to the idea of having a different ending, but let's explore all those thoughts, because we might have a way, it might make it a richer story by thinking about what's the sort of the hidden message that we want the audience to walk out from the theater and go, oh wow, yeah, that is kind of a be careful what you wish for kind of a thing.
How about because Von Etzen's very skeptical of the occult, so how about the messages never rule out or never be so confident in something that you can't keep an open mind?
Oh yeah, absolutely. No, I agree. He's the doubter at the very beginning. And he certainly has his eyes opened, literally and figuratively. So yeah, I absolutely, those are things. And for you guys as directors, that's going to be a key element in working with your actors, right? Making sure that they understand the subtext of what's going on, right? And so this is where you guys can really enhance their performance by helping them to sort of see what's going on under the surface. It's not just about a scary monster. It's about, this is about technology, or this is about, the bomb. Have you ever seen the Body Snatchers? The old version of the Body Snatchers? Yeah. I mean, it's a horror thing back in the 50s, but the entire film is sort of an allegory for communism taking over the world. And it's the story about these creatures that come to Earth and they take over people's bodies when they sleep. They're these big pods that end up becoming human beings and take over people's bodies. And so it's pretty much straightforward sci-fi horror film, but the underlying thought is communism is this creeping menace that's taking over the world as we sleep. If we're not aware that communism is going to, destroy the world, then it will take over us. And so it sort of took that movie from being just any other B-rated horror movie to almost cult-like status. And so think along those lines too when you're thinking about what how to help your character, help your actors find those characters.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other thoughts on story itself?
Not at the moment, on my part, at least.
Okay. All right. Yeah. I mean, we've got some more time. Okay. All right. So the last thing that that I wanted to throw out to you guys, I met with the UPM this morning. We've got a basic idea on schedule worked out, assuming that the screenplay, assuming that the script doesn't change too much. Give me a second. I want to pull up a screenshot for you. Assuming that the screenplay doesn't change too much from now until when we're ready to go. Where did it go? All right, hold on one second. So what we're looking at is we're going to have 7 days in the studio, and then of course the 1 day out at Paramount. The only question that we were talking about was whether or not we want to film in the actual church out there at Paramount. I don't know if you guys have ever been to that church out there, but the interior is basically a big room. There's no pews, there's no altar, there's nothing really. The only thing you have is the big box. And so my concern is that as much as I'd like to do the filming out there of that particular scene, there's going to be a lot of stuff that we're going to have to do. Whereas it might be easier for us to try to create that room in the soundstage using our sets. And so I'm leaning that direction. And so let me share this with you. This is all right. So this is basically what we're looking at the moment in terms of a rough schedule idea. You'll notice that our very first scene up is the interior train car scene. And it's only a page and 6/8. And we've talked about the fact that normally we try to shoot for at least 4 pages a day. The reason I've gone with this really short scene up front is it sort of eases us in. We're still pretty inexperienced at working together as a crew and our actors, and it gives us a chance to like ease into it. But then from then on, you can see that we've got quite a few things that we're going to try to knock out each day of shooting. We've grouped together the newspaper office and then the hotel room and all of these things. In my experience, I certainly think this is doable. Okay. And then when we get out to Paramount, that's a whole different can of worms out there. But these interior scenes, the way I've grouped them together, I think this works. And as of right now, this is probably the way we're going to go with maybe some minor changes. It's not really anything that you guys need to worry about, except in terms of working with your actors once we get them in place. Because some of the scenes, there's going to be some pretty serious emotion required. Related. That's going to be on our 3rd day of filming, right? And so your job as directors is going to be to prepare the actors to be able to find that emotional moment. It's not like theater where we start with scene 1 and we act all the way up until the climax, and so the actors have a chance to kind of build that emotion in the performance. That emotion is going to be something you're going to have to coach them on to get to that point early in the scenes, right? Early in the shooting, right? And so it's not a big deal. It's just something that you keep in mind in terms of when we get our cast in place and you start, talking with your actors. I want to leave it open to you. Do you have any questions about this basic first pass on the schedule? As you can see, it's a lot of work, right? But I think it's definitely something that's doable. So I'm going to leave it up to you guys. And this is something I want you to talk about with Jeremy. I don't necessarily have a problem either way you guys decide to go. Um, in terms of the actual logistics of three people directing it, I would be open to the idea of all three of you guys working on every scene as a team of three. And so when we start shooting, all three of you would be in Video Village, um, calling the, watching the take and talking about performance. Or we can divide it up so that each of you get your own scene. Sorry about that. Each of you get your own scene, and so then that's yours in terms of performance and interpretation and all of that. And so, what are your thoughts on that? There
I
are
like
problems either way, but I want it to be something that works for you guys too.
I like the dividing up the scenes.
Okay, Karen, how do you feel about that, Karen?
I'm open for either, actually.
Well, what would you prefer? I mean, if you had your choice, would you like to have control of your own scenes, or?
I think that would be, I think I would like that.
Okay, all right. And so, unless Jeremy really has a real problem with it, I think that's the way we're going to go. And I think that's probably better, just because for actors, sometimes it's hard to be working for more than one director at the same time, because no matter how hard you try, sometimes you kind of give them conflicting feedback. So I think that's probably a better way to go. And then we'll just have to be mindful, making sure that everything, kind of stays consistent. We can decide a little later on, who's going to take what scenes. So, if you want to talk amongst yourselves, if there's a particular scene that you really think is great, and you really are eager to go with it, then, talk among yourselves and we'll figure something out in that regard.
Yeah.
Okay. Andres, that sound pretty good to you?
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay. So Tessa, do you, we've kind of started to get a visual idea of the approach that we're going to go with. Later on, in the next couple of weeks, you and I and Rebecca will be talking about, specific choices. In class on tomorrow, we're going to be looking at different lenses, and we're going to talk about, how lenses affect the audience's perception of a scene. And we're going to be talking about some stuff like that. And so we can start thinking about those types of choices. We've already decided that, we would like to incorporate some motion in certain areas. And so that'll be things that we'll be planning on. And then when we start talking about lens choices and specifics about lighting, then, one of the things will be helpful will be to have, actual layouts of how our sets are going to be built. So as a DP, that kind of gives you an idea of, okay, where can I put my lights and what's my motivating source and so on and so forth. So I think we're making a lot of really good progress. Tessa, do you have any questions for me regarding, at this stage in terms of the DP stuff?
Did you want the list of major lighting concerns?
Yeah, if you've got some major lighting concerns, that I'd love to hear what you're thinking, because they're probably ones that I noticed in reading the script.
Okay. So the ones that aren't really concerns are things like whether or not the fireplace will be seen in the shot or just the flicker effect of the light.
Right.
Light through the shutters of the train car window. Should that light vary to create look of movement, or are we just going to focus on the shutters? And then the rest of the not real big concerns are just like relation to the shadow and how we want to approach that. But
to answer those questions real quickly, those are really good observations, and this is exactly what a DP does when they read through a script. They look at it and they go, all right, well, if the director says I must see the fireplace, then that's going to give us some issues for the DP. It's also going to be issues for, but those are exactly what a DP is going to be looking at. And in terms of the fireplace being in the shot, I think we all would agree that having the fireplace in the shot would be a great touch. And so if we can think about a way that can happen, then sure. But we also, from a director's perspective, be thinking about, okay, if we can't pull off showing the fireplace creatively so that there's the implication that there's a fireplace there. I mean, we'll see the fireplace, but we don't want to see the fire. Those are things that we'll be thinking about. So, and in terms of the train car, I've done something very similar in a previous shoot that I did, where it was on a train and there's light. There's a pretty easy way to make it happen, but it's definitely one of those things you put on your list of, okay, let's make sure we know how to do this, because it's not something that you want to show up on set and go, oh boy, now what are we going to do? Okay, so those are great concerns. I agree, they're not big problems, but that's definitely something we can be thinking about for the next couple of weeks.
And then the three scenes with the actual like concern. Well, two of them are like what you discussed before, the shooting night during day exterior. So that's scenes 18 and 19. But the biggest lighting concern was scene 9, where Von Etzen looks across the street at night to the office. So not only are we talking about shooting day during night, but it's across the street at nighttime where lights go on and off, which obviously looks very different how you film it during day when the lights go off.
Yeah.
So,
So again, this is something that when we start working through the script, the directors may be thinking one way. The directors may be going, okay, well, we're just going to show over his shoulder out the window and we see the newspaper office and the lights go out, which would be probably the easiest, most straightforward way to shoot that. But keep in mind, the interior scenes in the hotel where he's in his hotel room, we're filming those on our soundstage. And then the outside office, the newspaper office is out at Paramount, right? And so one of the things that's going to require is going to be visual effects, right? My guess would be, and this is just, very, very early on in the process, the easiest way to do that would be to shoot it through the window and have a green screen behind it that we can then composite in footage that we would shoot at Paramount on the day we're out there, right? Because we're going to be doing some day for night stuff anyway. And so at that point, we do a day for night, and the actual light inside the newspaper office might have to be a composite as well. So in other words, we do a visual effect that we composite in to our green screen shot over the window, right? But that's definitely something that we're going to need to have a plan in place. And even, we may even need to do a couple of tests to make sure it's going to work properly. Okay. So yeah, there's a couple of shots like that where he's looking at something that might be hard to replicate. You're very correct to be concerned about the day for night, because day for night, if not done properly, can look really, really bad. One of the ways to make it better is to make sure that we shoot it when the sun's low in the sky, which means either early in the morning or late in the afternoon. And so when, the schedule that I put together, I've got it scheduled for the last 2 shots of the day, right? And so as we're getting to the end of our day at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, the sun will be low and it's going to be much easier to get day for night. But again, for you directors, this is going to be one of those times when less is more, and we just need enough angles and we need to block it so that we are very careful with where our camera's pointing. I think we can make a very believable day for night, especially since they're very short scenes and it just needs to set up the feeling that this is at nighttime, right? And so Tessa, one of the things that we're going to be doing for the DP team is talking about neutral density filters. What's the best way to get a day for night? What are the camera settings that we want to use? Those are things that DPs will be thinking about in this day for night thing. Directors will be thinking about, okay, how do we shoot this thing really simple so that we don't have to worry about, it looking too bad in terms of day for night. Okay. And so that's a really great, it's a really great observation, Tessa. And what was there something else that you had mentioned?
No, I think that was all of the lighting concerns.
Yeah. And then, I have, you had already mentioned it earlier about the actual, I guess it's scene 20, the monster in the church. Another reason why I think it's better for us to try to build the church interior on our soundstage is we've got more control over the light, right? And it's going to be really, really important for us to be careful with our lighting and our camera angles with that monster, like you said, to make sure it looks ominous, but also doesn't look like somebody in a rubber mask, right? And so, that I think, it's certainly within our capabilities, and I think we can pull it off pretty easily. But I'm glad you're thinking along those lines, because that's exactly the way a DP thinks. Okay. Did you have any other big or little lighting concerns?
Well, no, because I think aside from the ones I mentioned, they're all interior or exterior day.
Right. Yeah. And the exterior days, for the most part, my experience shooting out at Paramount before was, at the very least, they need to throw up some sort of an overhead silk to kind of just soften the light. But we probably won't even be using lighting units in the street scenes. But we'll kind of play that by ear as it gets closer.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Directors, do you guys have any thoughts or concerns? I mean, there's obvious concerns, but
no. Do you happen to know if they're going to be changing the script a lot?
No. They didn't seem to want to change the script much, and I wouldn't be in favor of changing the script much, with the exception of maybe adding that one scene where he discovers his sister. Other than that, I think we're pretty close to locking script in terms of major alterations. So I wouldn't see anything else major coming down the road.
Okay.
So Tessa, let me ask you, and you can consult with Rebecca on this. I'll throw it out to you. I would recommend that you and Tessa each kind of divide up the scenes that you each want to work on instead of working together. And what we'll probably do is, if you're not DPing for that day, then you'll work with the rest of the lighting crew as either a gaffer or an electric. But I would be in favor of each DP having their own scenes, kind of like the directors want to do, just because it gives you a little bit better opportunity to learn the different techniques. Okay, so if you want to talk to Rebecca about that, and I'm open to suggestions, but that would be the way I would recommend going with it.
Okay.
Okay. Any other thoughts? Are you guys going to be talking to Jeremy?
Yeah.
Okay. So just let him know that I'm going to be posting this, and I'll send a link to everybody. He maybe want to stop in and watch it when he can, so that he catches up on what we talked about. For you directors, what I need from you guys, example of a casting breakdown, right? And it's essentially how we describe what we're looking for in an actor, so that we can post the casting notice, right? And so I'll send you one from another project that we worked on that kind of gives you an idea. What I'd like you guys to do is write up casting descriptions for the major characters.
Okay.
Right? In particular, of course, Von Ensign, Bond. What's the other professor guy?
Mason.
Mason.
Bond.
Yeah, Bond, Von Ensign, Mason, Emma,
and Rufus.
What's that? Rufus, right? Yeah, I mean, you pretty much know what the major, any major speaking role, right? If it's just the bartender, I wouldn't worry about it, because he's essentially just a featured extra. But obviously, Wadley, Zeke or Zeb, I mean. Yeah, and so go ahead and if you could write that up in the next couple, you don't have to have it by tomorrow, of course. That way we can put together the casting notice, and then I can post the notice.
Okay.
What I've also done already is I've sent out an email to actors who have worked on previous projects with us, letting them know that we're going to be holding auditions. And so far, every one of them that's worked with us before said they're definitely going to come out to the auditions. And so I think we, and if the ones that have said that they're going to be here, I think they could be good for a lot of different roles. But we'll go through the casting process, and we obviously want to select the people that are going to be the best choices for these different roles.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think our next biggest thing is to try to get this thing cast. Find our actors. So that way we've got time. Okay. Any other thoughts,
So
guys?
you're gonna be sending over that sheet of a
I will.
sample,
I'll
right?
send you an example of a
Okay,
casting
cool.
breakdown. And so then you
Okay,
guys can,
perfect.
and I'll send it to all three of you guys. That way you guys can, work on it individually and then, maybe get together, put your heads together.
Okay.
Sounds good.
And Tessa, for you, really right now, it's just, be thinking about, lighting ideas for these different scenes. Maybe sit down and, look at each of the scenes and maybe jot a couple of notes in the margin of the script about, what you're thinking. And then that kind of gives us a way of starting to build the lighting plan. Okay. And you said you had a question about the budget stuff.
Yeah, just because that was on the list of
Yeah, don't
cinematographers.
worry about that too much. First of all, you don't really need to put together a budget. I just want you to get in the habit of knowing that a director of photography, for example, if we decide that in scene 1, we're going to need, a 3-ton grip truck package or whatever, that's the DP is going to go, okay, I need to have this for this day, this for this day, this for this day, and it's going to cost this much to rent it. Okay, obviously we're not renting anything, but it sort of puts you in the idea. You start thinking in terms of, okay, I need to make sure I've got all of the stuff that I need in advance. Okay, so I wouldn't, don't worry about the budget. We can talk more about that once we start, because right now we don't really know how we're lighting these scenes. Within the next week and a half, that's going to start coming together, because we're going to have an idea of how the sets are going to look, so we know how this thing is going to be lit. Okay.
Yep.
Does that help answer your question? Okay. You guys have any other questions for me?
Not at the moment.
Guys, thanks so much. I know it's a Sunday and, everybody's normally relaxing, but this is really, really helpful to make sure that we keep this thing on track. As you can tell, there's a lot of stuff that's got to come together, and I'm really excited. It sounds like we're really on track. Hopefully you guys are looking forward to it.
Yeah, definitely.
All right. So if there's anything that comes up, just send me an email, and otherwise I'll see you guys tomorrow.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
All right. Take care, guys. Enjoy your Sunday.
You too. Bye.